I did a previous video in which we focused upon natural sequences in combos, which is where each technique thrown subsequent to the first one naturally follows it, and the finishing position for the last technique becomes the start of the next one and makes sense due to the human biomechanics. But in this video I want to focus on unnatural sequences, and you need to be proficient in both of these, as I will go on to explain. So while natural sequences create a sense of fluidity because all of the punches flow together, unnatural sequences are what you could consider to be broken, and one or more of the techniques has to come after a short reset by the person performing them. So the obvious factor is that being proficient in executing unnatural sequences is really important, because when you're in a fight, if you don't have the opportunity to perform fluid and natural sequences, you don't want to run into trouble when you haven't got the opportunity. And what I want to focus on today is that becoming really proficient in unnatural sequences develops an intricate sense of body awareness and muscular control that will serve to improve all of your other movements. So I'll give a few examples now of unnatural sequences, and then I'm going to focus upon one to illustrate further points on the topic. The first one is jab, cross, rear uppercut, lead hook. And it's unnatural because the cross and the rear uppercut use the same arm, which entails a subtle pause or reset that I spoke of earlier. And this sequence contains one break in it, but they can also contain more than one as well, depending on the techniques. Like this one, which is jab, lead hook, cross, rear uppercut, which contains two breaks. One after the jab before the lead hook, and the other after the cross before the rear uppercut. Now what we want to aim to do is be absolutely in control of our entire body throughout the whole combo, but particularly the break period, so that we can choose how long we wish for it to take place. And where people go wrong with this kind of thing is they don't have control of their body due to having poor technique. And this can be simply not being familiar with the combo, and improvements will happen naturally the more you train it, but also weakness in the associated muscles, leading to an inability to contain the generated energy, which can express as poor balance and laboured movement. So once again, the theme of much of the things I teach on this channel is we need to make the technique as efficient as possible with little wasted movement. In the example of the second combo, when executing the jab to the hook with the same arm, if the technique is poor on either of the techniques, it's going to negatively impact the speed at which they can be executed in succession. For example, if my jab is poor and I don't retract it back sufficiently or drop it too low, then I'm inadvertently creating more work for myself in terms of having to execute the hook afterwards. Once the base techniques are to a high enough level, and this gives us freedom to play around with the combo a little bit more, and this is where we can get into being selective about the amount of power we put into each of the techniques. So in this example, if I executed a stiff and very powerful jab, it would have a knock-on effect of me then having to control myself and regain composure before executing the hook. So instead I would execute a rapid, light and measuring jab that just glances the target and then immediately execute the hook, which is something you cannot do if you're trying to put power into every shot. And I will make a full video on this, as it's a very vast area, but I just wanted to include that here to show you how interconnected everything is. In my own training, the way I've been developing this is with sequences like this jab, uppercut, hook, all thrown with the same arm rapidly. And I train this against these tires because they're very hard and don't absorb much of my energy between each punch. And by repeating this sequence a hell of a lot of times through the process of trial and error, I'm basically teaching myself the optimal way to execute this combo that's fast and controlled but also powerful. And this has a secondary effect of strengthening my core and tendons in unique ways that can only be developed by doing things like this. In training this way, I'm figuring out the right amount of twist and retraction in and out of each technique based upon my own body, which is often called loading up a punch. And this can just become infinitely nuanced depending on the intention of how you want that combo to be. So for instance, if you want full power on each of the techniques, then that will require a more severe loading phase for each one, which will mean that some speed is naturally sacrificed. But in my example, I'm trying to make the combo fast, controlled and also powerful, kind of somewhere in the middle of all of those. So what I mean by this is that if I twist too far away from the target between each punch, it creates bad economy of motion. The punches become laboured and I have to play catch up to continue the combo. But then conversely, I don't want to twist too little, because then I'm not going to have any snap and power into the techniques and I'll be just punching from the arms. And as I mentioned, this is a process of learning and understanding through trial and error. So when you start out, you might be able to execute 1 in 10 combos optimally, and then that number will go up the more you train. But it's not a linear process, and the time it takes to get to say 2 out of 10 combos executed well won't be the same of what it takes to get 4 out of 10 executed well. As with any skill, the higher you progress, the more incremental the improvements become and the longer they take to achieve as well. So I urge you guys to have fun with this and just play around with some unnatural sequences. You don't have to overthink the process, just freely express yourself and be creative with it. And this is something I like to do regularly when I'm shadowboxing, and you can also make sequences that would otherwise be natural unnatural by changing up one or more of the punches, or even the starting stance entirely, like in the following example. This sequence of jab, cross, lead hook, spin hook is a natural sequence, but can be made unnatural by executing the punches from southpaw and then still executing the spin hook from the same leg. Now this isn't likely to be something you'd execute practically, but that's not the function of it. Think outside the box about the benefits of essentially having to force your body against against its own momentum to get that spin hook out after executing the punches in the southpaw stance. The more competent you get at doing this kind of thing, and the faster and more aggressively you're able to do this, is incidentally going to improve things like your balance and body control by leaps and bounds in ways that you wouldn't get by sticking to what you know. And then think about consistently doing this stuff over the long term and the subtle ways in which you're going to develop over people who just do the same old generic combos all the time that everybody's doing, which ultimately just results in a really slow rate of progression. So this is the kind of stuff for me that I'm personally probably most interested in training, and what's always on my mind when I'm having a session. It's actually how you improve at an accelerated rate rather than that very slow progression where you don't really know what's going on. And I think this is because people aren't really aware of any of this stuff, and they're just kind of training blind. They don't really know what's happening to their body at each stage of the movement, and so consequently they don't know how to correct it. And this is what's known as vertical improvement as opposed to horizontal improvement. Horizontal is where the person performs using their existing expertise and technical competencies, whereas vertical improvement challenges that person to apply their expertise in different ways or environments. And the way to get to elite level proficiency in your movement is to do both. So I hope you enjoyed this one today, guys, and please let me know if what I actually said makes sense. And the reason I say that is because the way my mind works and thinks about training when I'm writing the scripts for these videos, I start out with a simple idea and it evolves into something like this. So I'd just like to know if it actually makes sense to you. So please just leave a comment and let me know. As always, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. If you have a question, just leave it in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer it. I've got some really exciting things coming up in the new year, like some training courses and things like that go really in depth into all of this stuff in a very succinct way. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.